Welcome back. Again, if you haven't seen the first videos in this series, I encourage you to watch those. They are cumulative or foundational to what we're going to cover today, and that is storming. If you remember from last week, if you've seen last week's video, the first step or stage in group formations is forming or joining the group. And it'd be nice to think that after you join the group, things would go smoothly. It seems counterintuitive that the next stage would be storming, but if we think about it, it does make sense. Let's take a look at what at least one of the positives and one of the negatives that tend to accompany storming. Some of the significance of storming is the positive aspect of personal passions, but also the negative dynamic of interpersonal conflicts. And those really do go together. Positively, when people storm, meaning they have conflict with you, that's because they have their own personal goals. They are passionate about certain things that they have invested themselves in the past, skill sets, desires, histories, things that they want to accomplish, and they may rightly or wrongly perceive that those things are not going to be accomplished in this group, that they're not highlighted in this group, that there might be, those things might be marginalized, or and again, those may be true or not true perceptions, but it is basically human to us that when we really want something and we join a group, that we would hope that others would share that same passion. They don't necessarily, and that can begin to elicit interpersonal conflict. Doesn't have to stop there, but we do need to acknowledge that it is a real part of the group. If we sweep it under the rug, ignore it, try to dismiss it or invalidate it, it'll only get worse. If you can imagine yourself being hungry for something and people are saying, don't worry about it, the hunger will go away, it's only going to intensify your anger or anxiety or desire for that hunger to be satisfied. Let's take a look at something from last week, that a discussion prompt that I offered, that I'll offer each week, that I think may be helpful. Consider both of these, personal passions and interpersonal conflicts, in exploring your role in past neighborhoods, family situations, work, or social groups. Again, as I mentioned last week, it can be very helpful to reflect back on a time when you struggled with these things. You had just joined a group, now you're in a storming phase, and you're kind of exploring that new group. What about the things that I want? Why do you see things differently? Why aren't you pursuing the things that I believe are passionate, or I'm passionate for? Again, it's just human nature for us to want people to come alongside us, to journey with us in the same direction. And as we explore the group and what other people want to accomplish, what the group as a whole exists for, that purpose, some of that storming can intensify. Some of it can be mitigated, lessened, and begin to be resolved, but only if we work through the storming. It's easy to want to lessen the time of storming, but if we do that, others will either internalize it and it'll only get worse in time, or they'll begin to act out in ways that are very counterproductive right now. So it's got to be worked through in the time that it takes. Let's take a look at another dynamic that we should consider. As I mentioned before, effective strategies must recognize and enable, or as appropriate, reward both the positive and the negative. Now, I've probably said that poorly. We don't want to reward the negative. We do want to at least recognize it and validate the negative, but also reward the positive. Any of the strategies we employ need to do both. If we only recognize and reward the positive, then the internal conflicts, the interpersonal conflicts that people are experiencing, those will, in their perception, be pushed aside. Hey, that's no big deal, which will only make people even more angry, even more worried that their concerns will not be addressed, even more depressed that they're not valued as a member of the team. So, you know the old saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We've just got to take the time to recognize not just the good, the personal passions that they bring to the table, their skills, their histories, their goals, but also the interpersonal conflicts so that we can work through them to get to the next stage that we'll cover next week, which is norming, beginning to come together at some mutual agreements of strategies and goals and objectives. Well, let's look at some specific strategies that can both enable and reward the positive and recognize the negative in storming. One of the things that we should do is to know and validate each person by their role, which is functional, and by their contributions, which may be more personal, not by their status. There's an easy tendency to validate and know people by their status, their title, their unusual and highlighted skill set, their education that may be greater than somebody else's, their vast experience over somebody who is new to the group and also is new in their subject matter expertise or their responsibilities. But if we only get to know and validate people by their status, then we're kind of looking at the bell curve. There's a few people that really don't have a lot of status, and there's a few that have great status, but most people are in the middle. So if we only know and validate people who are esteemed by their titles, their degrees, their years of experience, we're neglecting most of the group. We need to know people individually, because there are some things that are not naturally highlighted, but if we get to know them, we will find out that they bring a lot to the table. They have an unusually high degree of integrity. This person is so loyal and they will not quit. They will stick to the group no matter what. Those things are not highlighted on a resume, but as we get to know people and validate them for those things and others, it's a win-win. We motivate the individual. The team benefits because we know more of what they bring to the table. It just benefits everybody. Another very simple strategy, both to validate the positive and the negative, is to define conflicts by individuals' positive goals, not negative personalities. This is very common in counseling. If you have two spouses that are at odds with each other, I'll just give an example off the top of my head. I may turn to the husband and say, you really value a sense of power for the family. You want everybody to be able to have a voice and contribute because you value every individual. You, on the other hand, value peace in the family. You want people to get along. And sometimes those things feel like they're at odds with each other. Look how I just validated two positive things. I kind of stated the elephant in the room. You're not getting along, but the reason you're not getting along is you both have good goals that at present have not been reconciled of how you can accomplish both of them together. When we do that, we tend to not put one person over the other, but we lift both up and say, okay, how can we try to make these things work together, not just for your individual good, but for the good of the marriage or good of the group, whatever your team may be. If we make it about personality, it's a lose-lose, because personality is a preference. Some people prefer to be more introverted, some prefer to be more extroverted, some prefer to be thinkers, some prefer to be feelers. We can go on and on with nuances or flavors of personality that are not good or bad, they're just different. And so if we, and we typically will align ourselves, of course, with people who are like our personality. We have to make it more about the individual's positive goals and paint those conflicts in positive lights so we can bring other people in the group together. Does that make sense? Another very simple strategy is to allocate roles if you're a supervisor, or accept the allocation of roles if you're a subordinate, and support each other's function and trust. Roles are necessarily going to have different levels of responsibility. They're going to have different spheres of influence. They're going to have different titles. They're going to have different visibility. But all of the roles are important. It's analogous to members of a body. Which is more important, toes or fingers? Well, it depends on whether you're drinking coffee or running a race. Which is more important, your heart or your lungs? Well, it's a silly question. They both need each other, right? Same thing with any group. I like to tell some people that Most people know who Billy Graham, the famous evangelist, is, but nobody would know who he was if it wasn't for his sound man or his sound woman. That person, nameless person behind the scenes that's doing the absolutely crucial work to connect him to listeners out there. So we need to validate and understand each other's roles and talk about those and what they bring to the table, their concerns about how their roles are not necessarily linking up with other people in the group, to smooth those connections so we have individual fulfillment personally, but also functional fulfillment within the group toward the goal. Lastly, we need to remind each other that one's rise or fall into a role does not change their worth. Again, people may storm because they are elevated to a position of greater authority and they don't want all that responsibility, or they may storm because they are relegated to a lower level of support and they want more recognition. We need to remind them that roles are not synonymous with personal worth. Roles are simply functions for the group. In many cultures, feet are considered unclean, and to take off your shoes and socks in somebody else's presence may be disrespectful or respectful in their house. To show them the bottom of your feet may be disrespectful. To give a foot rub or foot washing could be very intimate and respectful. Depends on the culture. But a lot of that is because the feet tend to be very dirty. They're low to the ground and they get dirty, right? They get smelly. But what is more foundational, what is more important to a person's body than our feet that carry us places? We take care of our feet because if our feet are hurting or diseased or even smelly, then the rest of our body doesn't function well. Same thing in a personal group, no matter whether we're talking about your family or your co-workers or your softball team on the weekends or anything. All roles in the group are important, and we need to remind each other that the higher roles, or what we might describe as the lower roles, have nothing to do with the person's worth. In fact, sometimes those less highlighted roles are even more critical to the functioning of the group. And we might need to give them a little more attention because they don't typically receive the eye-level attention that supervisors or people with titles get. Does that make sense? So storming is a natural part of group formation. We have to go through the process, and paradoxically, the better we storm, the better we will norm and perform, because this is where real trust and respect and mutual helps are proven. When people can storm well together and they don't abandon each other, and I'm not saying attack each other, that's not what I mean by storming, but when we can have conflict and still be faithful to each other, still listen to each other, find out what's behind that hurt or that anger or that worry, and help each other through that, that proves who is really going to be there for you when things get tough later. Storming is critical to any group formation. And remember, because we're always part of many different groups, we are always storming. We might not be the new guy or gal to the group that you're thinking of right now, but somebody else may be new to your group, and you might not realize it, but they're storming within themselves, or things that they say or do with you are signs of storming. Doesn't mean that you are a bad guy or bad gal or you've done something wrong. It just means they're going through some conflict and they need your help to get through that phase so that they feel a genuine and strong sense of belonging in that group. Hope that's helpful to you. We'll see you next week when we look at the third stage, which is norming in the group. Hope to see you then.